Hello everyone, I'm Zahid. Thank you for clicking this video. I'm very happy that you're here today. So today I'll be continuing my chapter series on this book by Chukwuebuka ibeh called Blessings. Today we'll be reading part 2, chapter 12. I've been enjoying just reading this book so far, and like my other chapter videos, I like to give a brief recap about sort of the chapter before chapter 12, which was chapter 11. I like to sort of give a recap about the previous chapter before I read the new one. And so to sort of talk about chapter 11, in chapter 11, we're sort of focused on one of the main character, Uzoamaka. She is the mother of Opifuna. And in chapter 11, we have sort of this moment in which she goes on her sort of typical hospital visit with her doctor, because as we read about in chapter 11, she has been diagnosed with cancer. And so for the past few months, I believe about 5 months now, she has been receiving chemotherapy to sort of help her, and she's been, getting different surgeries to, I guess, make her time last longer, and making sure that she's trying to stay as healthy as possible despite the fact that she's dealing with this major and severe sickness slash disease that's really strong and could possibly end her life. And this sort of chapter sort of starts with Uzumaka thinking about whiteness. So in chapter 11, we sort of explore Uzumaka's sort of complexity. First of all, it starts with a scene in which, when she was at the hospital, she was sort of looking around at the whiteness, and sort of wondering to herself how having a color or a coat with pure white was just very, you know, in her perspective, she viewed it as though a hospital at the end of the day isn't really a place that, screams hope. People are literally on their deathbeds trying to, have some sort of hope. And she views it as though, why would you wear white knowing that, it's just a place that it lacks hope. But, when I was reading that, I was just thinking, oh, maybe this is part of her thinking of what she's going through, and she knows that she's sort of late. We read about how she didn't like the idea of the doctors, sort of calling it an emergency, despite the fact that her state has gotten to the point that it was too late. There was nothing that could be done. She felt that, and so she sort of being controversial about sort of the whole idea of the doctor saying that. And then they have her and the doctor have this sort of interesting relationship, and in particular, it started when she was sort of with him, and he was asking about her current state and why she came alone. He was asking why Anansi wasn't here, and she'd have expressed to him that Anansi isn't here, I believe because it was either because he was busy, but then a part of her also said that she just liked the fact of being alone and coming to the appointments alone, because she didn't have to deal with Arnold's sort of tension and sort of his confrontational look at the doctor. And so all these things just made it worse for her. And she's currently at this just really, difficult state in her life, in which she's obviously dealing with cancer and trying to stay hopeful. And, we can see that she really doesn't seem hopeful. But anyways, back to Uzumaka and sort of the doctor's relationship. We have this moment in which she sort of looks at the table, his desk, and she sees this sort of photograph of him when he graduated school or something like that, and he was with his mother, and his younger brother, I believe, as we read later on. But what Uzumaka saw was just a woman and a younger sort of individual, and she goes on to ask sort of where's your father or something like that. I think she asked, where is your is this your mother? And then I think he said yes, and then she sort of questions where his father was. And while she was doing this, she basically interrupted him, because he was prior to that he was asking something about her health. and he was just taken aback by that. But anyways, it was just a really funny moment to me. And then, after the whole situation, she sort of apologizes, and then she goes, into the taxi, thinking, pondering where his father was, and after she sort of asked him where he graduated school and sort of how he looked young in the face, despite the fact that he actually graduated a while ago. All these things were just roaming her mind, but mostly what roamed her mind was the fact that she didn't see a father figure in the photograph. Even when she was in the shower, despite the fact that she was clean, she still sort of stood there thinking about that. It just kept roaming her mind. But anyways, to sort of add on, what I think chapter 11 essentially focuses on is Uzoamaka's deep fear of Obifuna finding out. Since not being able to see him, he doesn't really know what's going on. He's in boarding school due to the fact that his dad sent him after he caught Obifuna, having this intimate relationship with another character in the book called a boy. And by now, I believe that you know this character. But to continue, she basically is just deeply worried, and she knows just from past experience how Obifuna deals with just hearing that his mother is sick. There was a time in the book, or in the chapter that we read, that when Obifuna was a really young boy, there was a situation in which Uzoamaka fell, and she sort of had this large bruise on her shoulder or her arm, and Obifuna went into a really, bad fever due to this because he just couldn't cope with it. And imagine if he heard the news about Uzoamaka having cancer, how that would just deeply crush him. And she felt very heartbroken at the fact that she just couldn't tell him, and the fact that she doesn't even know how to tell him. And with the whole things that have been going on with her and Anazi and their constant shouting and arguments, she just also hesitated to even go see him. Actually, with also what's going on with her physically and in her life, and how she's now having cancer, and she's been also avoiding seeing him, and she doesn't really know how to tell him this. But yeah, that's sort of how chapter 11 ended. But today I will now go on to reading today's chapter, which is chapter 12 of part 2. I'm very excited. Thank you once again for being here. I hope you stick all the way to the end of this video. And yeah, please comment and let me know if you have any questions or any suggestions or anything or just anything you would like to say. Please kindly comment. But now I will read chapter 12 of part 2. Part 2, chapter 12. The first thing Obifuna noticed about him was his uniform. His crisp white shirt, ever spotless and glistening when it caught the sun, neatly tucked into sleek, tapered trousers with razor-sharp lines running downwards, white socks and shoes that seemed never to have smelled dust or dirt. His name was Mordecai, but everyone, for some reason, called him Sparrow. He belonged to the clique of the coolest boys in class. The boys were known for their snobbishness. All 6 of them lived ostensibly easygoing, crease-free lives, free of the familiar hurdles, everything made much easier by the string of school fathers who protected them and the teachers who adored them. They appeared elevated in a sense from the rest of the class, existing in their own exclusive orbit. They had the same things in common. They were almost immaculately dressed and sported the best watches and scandals. They had the same things in common. They were always immaculately dressed and sported the best watches and sandals. They were always absent at functions, and they even had a bedroom to themselves. Having arrived early or intimated the original occupant into accepting an exchange, there was something curious about their power. None of them possessed any notable physical strength, and yet they commanded an influence over even the strongest students. Their leader, Mako, was a high flyer, the second best student in the whole class, and a mathematics genius. He was also Sparrow's best friend, and with another boy named David, they formed a trio that appeared to inhabit an even more exclusive orbit than the rest of their group, relating to the other cool boys occasionally with thinly veiled condescension that was apparent to a discerning eye. Obifuna ideally fantasized about becoming one of them, being reserved without having to make any conscious effort. Most of all, he wondered what it would mean to be friends with Sparrow. He was aware that his existence went entirely unnoticed by Sparrow. In Obifuna's time at the school, Sparrow had never spoken to him directly. There had never been occasion for their paths to intersect, and yet Obifuna watched him assiduously, content with just observing, taken by his roguish demeanor, his life of clean lines, his loose limbed, sure-footed walk. Sparrow possessed an arrogant swagger that Obifuna found irresistible. He was one of the chapel instrumentalists, and sometimes, watching him strike the piano with long, lean fingers, Obifuna would close his eyes and allow himself a fleeting fantasy of those fingers tracing patterns on his bare skin. Obifuna was in a Obifuna was in the second term of his SS2 year, and it went without saying, as the date for the prefect handover ceremony drew near, that Sparrow would be at the foremost. Obifuna was in the second term of his SS2 year, and it went without saying, as the date for the prefect handover ceremony drew near, that Sparrow would be at the forefront. Obifuna had considered applying, but the positions he fancied, health, agric, or laboratory, already had people in the running, most of them recommended by their soon-to-be predecessors, and Obifuna had neither the zeal nor the willpower to challenge them. Jeku applied for the position of house prefect, and he was crippled with nervousness the day before the interview. Failing the basic prep session Obifuna had set up for him. By morning, he was still unable to recite his memorized lines of self-introduction, and he took whole minutes before he was due to be called in for the interview, taking deep breaths. Maybe just ditch the speech and be yourself, Obifuna suggested. Jeku looked at him in panic. You think the speech is bad? No, but you might be more convincing if you are not stuttering over half of the words. Jeku sighed, flinging the piece of paper to the floor. I don't even know what I was thinking when I applied. Look, you have got this. You don't even have any competition. Stop thinking about it too much. That hasn't stopped them from disqualifying people in the past, Jeku said gloomily. Those people would persuade someone who isn't even interested to take up a post and disqualify someone who pinned for it. Obifuna chuckled at the truth of it. The senior prefect in Senior Papilo's time was said to have been in class studying when he was summoned to the rector's office and had the post conferred upon him, with the entire horde of boys who had spent the whole day reciting manifestos before the prefect committee overlooked. Senior Papilo himself had been repeatedly offered the position of sports prefect, even though he had not applied. Hey, can I have your tie? A voice said. Obifuna half turned to see Sparrow gesturing at Jeku. How had he made an appearance so casually? The heady scent of his cologne filled Obifuna's nostrils. What? Chiku said, astounded. I just heard I'm up next and I forgot mine. Sparrow replied breezily. The offense in Jeku's tone was lost on him. Jeku said, You think you're the only one applying for a post? Are you? There was a look of surprise in Sparrow's eyes. Yes, Jeku snapped. He had caught the look, too, and appeared irritated. You know there are other people who exist apart from you and your stupid. You can have mine, Obifuna said. They both turned to look at him, Jeku with startled betrayal, Sparrow with puzzled surprise, and finally a new look of recognition. Sparrow saw him. Obifuna undid the tie from around his neck, avoiding Jeku's eyes, and handed it to Sparrow. Sparrow received the tie from him with a slight nod and wound it around his neck in a firm knot. Against Sparrow's white shirt, Obifuna had never known his own tie to look so good. I won't forget this, Sparrow said. He was playing a game of cards with Wisdom later that evening when Sparrow returned the tie. He was smiling his signature smile, but there was something clouding his eyes. Did it go well? Obifuna asked, conversational. Did it go well? Obifuna asked conversationally, surprising himself at the ease of his rapport, as if he were used to talking to Sparrow. Fairly, Sparrow said, but the worry lines did not disappear. He seemed to linger, reluctant to walk away. Obifuna was too aware of his presence. He worried he would put down a wrong card, and worse than being penalized, draw odd stares. Are you reading this? Sparrow asked suddenly, snapping up a book from Obifuna's bed. He studied the cover closely, mouthing the title, Second Class Citizen. His expression serious. Yes, Obifuna said. What is it about? He asked. Obifuna never knew how to answer questions like this. And now, with Sparrow looking at him in the eye, seeming very interested in what he had to say, he went blank. A woman who goes to London to be with her husband, he finished, appalled at himself. Nice. Sparrow flipped to the back. Buchi emecheta. Sparrow flipped to the back. Buchi emecheta. Sounds familiar. From Joys of Motherhood. Do you know it? I think so. The one about the slave woman. Obifuna pondered a moment. Two of her novels have slave woman in them, but Joys of Motherhood is more popular. Okay, Sparrow said. He flipped the pages of the book, read through the author biography at the end, and replaced it on the bed. I'm impressed you read, he said. I like people who read. I like to read too, but I'm more interested in making money nowadays. Obifuna chuckled. He double-checked a card before putting it down. Sparrow was looking at him as if expecting a reply, and Obifuna suddenly found the air around him too dense, too solid to inhale. Sparrow's words, I like people who read, rang in his ears. Okay, make I push, Sparrow said, getting up. Thanks again. Are you friends with Sparrow now? Wisdom asked after Sparrow was out of the door. He sounded envious and disapproving at the same time. Obifuna shrugged. Sparrow liked him. It seemed incredulous to Obifuna, almost surreal, and as the days lengthened into a week, with Sparrow occasionally stopping by his room to say hi, easily striking up conversation with him when they crossed paths in public, Obifuna anticipated that something would go wrong. Something would snap and return things to their usual place. Sometimes unconsciously he willed it. Once, as he ascended the classroom staircase, he made out Sparrow and his friends at the base and tried to walk past steadily. Stealthily, not making it awkward for anyone. But Sparrow spotted him and called out to him, moving over to shake his hand in full view of his friends, and Obifuna did not miss the puzzled glances they exchanged with each other. He wondered what they made of this new friendship, even as Sparrow took to stopping by his heat. He wondered what they made of this new friendship, even as Sparrow took to stopping by his seats during prep to talk to him, sometimes throughout the night. It deprived Obifuna of precious study time, yet he looked forward to those visits and worried when Sparrow was late in coming. Mostly, Sparrow talked about his relationships at home, the movies he loved, the song lyrics he knew by heart. They bonded over their mutual fascination for the Lord of the Rings series, disagreed over which Michael Jackson album was the best. Sparrow gave rapturous monologues on his adoration of Lil Wayne and his YMCMB crew. He dreamed of becoming a rapper like Lil Wayne. His body studded with similar tattoos, exuding a similar extravagance. He sometimes complained about his friends. They were all the same, he said, bloody pretenders, the most annoying set of people he knew. They acted conceited when there was really nothing to be conceited about. It surprised Obifuna, Sparrow's ability to criticize the conceited nature of his friends while being fundamentally enshrouded in the same conceit himself. But he listened all the same and made empathetic sounds of agreement, relishing the time when Sparrow said, "They think they are special, but they are just blockheads. Look at you, for instance. You are very smart, but you don't even make noise." Sometimes, Sparrow turned up with exercises for Obifuna to solve, listening with vague interest as Obifuna explained. He updated Sparrow's notes, thrilled when Sparrow complimented his clean, rounded handwriting. He liked it when Sparrow said, after he scored high in an assignment with Obifuna's help, "I don't know what I would have done without you, Obi." On some nights, he thought Sparrow complex calculations, even though Sparrow never seemed to comprehend, waiting eagerly for a pause to chip in a random fact about Lil Wayne, a new tattoo idea he thought cool. "I don't know why we have so many masses in this chemistry." Sparrow complained once as Obifuna tried to explain atomic molecular mass to him. Obifuna retorted that someone had once said he didn't know chemistry teachers were Catholics. What with all the mass? A lame joke, and so he was startled when Sparrow burst into laughter, his shoulders rocking back and forth from the force of the sound. Obifuna was too conscious of Sparrow's right palm spread out lightly on Obifuna's left thigh and moving around without control the more he laughed. Obifuna's own hands had gone to sleep, and twitched almost painfully when he moved them. He wondered if Sparrow felt the same spark when he placed his palm on Sparrow's thigh. It was a stilted moment, mirrored in uncertainty. While they sat in silence after that laugh, feeling each other's thighs through their trousers, aware and yet feigning ignorance of their true intent. Sparrow's hand found Obifuna's erection first. Oh. Sparrow's hand found Obifuna's erection first, hard and aching within the tight space. He withdrew slightly as though it had been a mistake, and Obifuna was partly grateful for the dim light that hid his blush. They sat in silence for a long time, their hands still on each other's thigh, and then Sparrow found his erection again, and this time there was nothing gentle about the grip, nothing subtle or pretentious. Obifuna's hands were slower, hovering over Sparrow's belt, fumbling unsuccessfully with the hook until he felt Sparrow's fingers tapping the back of his palm. "Let's go to the house," he said. Obifuna found him on the staircase of Amadi House in 10 minutes, the time interval necessary to quell suspicion. Sparrow pulled him close with a force that momentarily alarmed him, as did the expertise with which Sparrow undid all his buttons at once, and yet somehow managed to leave them intact. But Sparrow gave him no time to process this. His hands were already tugging at Obifuna's belt, his tongue making its way into Obifuna's mouth. The sensation was new and consequently revolting, and Obifuna backed away, suddenly terrified by the thought of losing something of himself that he could not get back. No. Sparrow's hands hung for seconds in mid-air before he dropped them. His breathing was labored and heavy. Even with his head bowed, Obifuna was acutely aware of Sparrow's bewildered eyes on him. "I'm sorry," Obifuna said. He wished Sparrow would say something, but he was quietly buckling his belt and humming under his breath. Obifuna expected him to walk away afterwards and not speak to him again, but he moved over when he was done to help Obifuna button his shirt, his hum becoming louder. It became a routine. They would slip out of class simultaneously, midway into prep, to meet under the staircase, rubbing up against each other for long minutes in the dark, until Obifuna succumbed to the electrifying force that led to the stickiness in his underwear. Sparrow laughed every time this happened, prompting Obifuna, himself unsure about what was particularly funny, to laugh along. Sparrow had an intoxicating effect on him. He felt with Sparrow a delirious happiness that sometimes made his eyes spin. He looked forward to the nights when he would melt into Sparrow's hands. The noises that came from him on such nights were loud and strange to his own ears, and Sparrow would clasp a hand around his mouth sometimes, and later ask him teasingly if he was trying to get them caught. And they did get caught. On a rainy Saturday night, they had braved the rains to meet and had arrived at the spot, dripping water, laughing together. "See how I just got myself wet because of you," Sparrow said, and Obifuna laughed harder. He felt a light-headed sweetness, as though he had just got drunk on a sweet wine. Sparrow drew close to cover the space between them and placed a hand on the side of Obifuna's face to hold it in position so that Obifuna's eyes were focused squarely on his. It was not the usual frenzy they were accustomed to. This was the poignancy of two people who were beginning to fall in love. People who could derive satisfaction just from looking at each other. Sparrow's hands were on his chest, his waist, his arm, and when Sparrow slipped a tongue into his mouth, it left him breathless. Obifuna's eyes were closed, as were his ears, so he did not immediately see the torchlight reflecting on his back, on Sparrow's face, did not hear the familiar voice that yelled from afar, "Stop there!" In retrospect, Obifuna would marvel at his own skillfulness. He ran before he could fully comprehend what had just happened past the grove of plantain trees around the tap, past the mold of concrete blocks that lay in untidy heaps around the school compound. Arriving finally at the classroom, they had been discovered. He heard footsteps behind him and turned sharply, causing the smallest junior boy to scurry away. Sparrow had not come with him. Sparrow had been apprehended. He would be taken to the disciplinary committee and made to review who the other person was. Obifuna would be exposed to the whole world. He sat on a step and tried to still the trembling of his hands, the painful throbbing of his neck, the loud thudding of his chest. From behind him, the concerned voice of the junior boy wanted to know if he was all right. From upstairs, the jarring sound of the bell for prep dismissal filled the stairwell. Only 2 days later, the news of the two senior boys caught under the staircase of Amadi House having unnatural intercourse had become common knowledge. By now, Sparrow had become a poster boy for all that was immoral and outlawed. He was stalwart in the face of his humiliation, readily admitting to the crime, accepting the revelation that his case was spiritual, that he was possessed by 1,000 demons, would need deliverance. But he would not say who he had been with that. On that aspect of the interrogation, he maintained an unwavering silence. He had been made an exception to the rule banning flogging, had publicly received 20 strokes of the cane from Sir C.Y. himself, had been threatened with expulsion, exposure in a popular newspaper, but he held Obifuna's name sealed inside himself. 2 days later, an Obifuna would waft through his classes and house, his movements slow and numbing, each step he took layered in fear and uncertainty. He looked desperately for a glimpse of Sparrow and would cover when he was finally sighted. He wished he were invincible, absent from school, dead. He would long for Sparrow to look at him, communicate with his eyes what he was feeling, and he would look away, wishing Sparrow would not look at him when he finally did. He wanted to talk to Sparrow. What about? He wasn't certain, but Sparrow avoided him nowadays, staying away from the back seat as much as possible. And although it was easy to think of the development as Sparrow's way of protecting his anonymous, and although it was easy to think of the development as Sparrow's way of protecting his anonymity, Fuck! Sparrow. Okay. He wanted to talk to Sparrow. What about? He wasn't certain, but Sparrow avoided him nowadays, staying away from the back seat as much as possible. And although it was easy to think of development as Sparrow's way of protecting his anonymity, protecting his anonymity, he was no less wistful for what would have been. And when he met Sparrow at the top of the staircase one Wednesday evening after extramural classes, he expected him to walk away. His grip on Sparrow's arm was light, undecided, and Sparrow could have shrugged it off and gone ahead as he seemed to want to, but he stood still, his eyes on the floor. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? Obifuna asked. Sparrow was silent. He had his eyes on the lower stairs, studying the descent below. With his slumped stature, his slightly rumpled shirt, he embodied an innocence that broke Obifuna's heart. There was no trace of the defiance he bore in public. He looked scared and confused. Please don't mention my name, Obifuna said. Sparrow looked up at him just then, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time since that night, and Obifuna saw something in his eyes, hardened with resolve. Sparrow opened his mouth to speak, and then, seeming to change his mind, he simply shook his head and shrugged himself free of Obifuna's grasp, ascending the stairs without a backwards glance. Sparrow's case was the first to be called the following Thursday morning. The teacher who read the case, her face scrunched up in apparent distaste, looked up at the crowd when she mentioned the unnamed culprit in her report, and Obifuna felt his blood congeal, certain her eyes were on him, as were the eyes of every other people in the hall. He could tell that the many speculations that had been trailing for days had formed around him, and every stare in his direction was layered with meaning. Everyone was surely only biding their time until it was convenient to unmask him. The summoning of Sparrow to the podium resulted in an uproar and scattered mock applause. He walked to the podium with brisk movements, his eyes set forward, his gait almost confident amid the catcalling, amid the tugging of his trousers by the senior students in front that nearly made him trip. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes fixed stoically on the crowd. Sasiwai would not let him look down, and remained that way all through the reading of his case, and the inevitable subsequent judgment. He was being excluded. He had until the end of the day to leave his personal effect. The next case was something about stealing, and as Obifuna stood up to leave the chapel, suddenly needing to urinate, he worried he would fall and get dust on his shirt. The bathroom complex was empty when he got there. Healthy-looking flies swarmed about the molds of feces littered around the floor. He stood at a corner with his eyes closed, his belt undone, his penis in his right hand. The urine would not come. He half expected Sparrow to walk in and slap him, hit him over and over until he was curled on the floor in a messy heap, or stare at him with that look of empty emotion that it almost hurt more than fists ever could. He wondered if Sparrow thought of himself as brave, if the decision to protect him was born out of a sense of loyalty. Sparrow did not have to protect him. He had nothing to lose and potentially a lot to gain by giving him up. He had walked down from the podium after his fate had been decided with his eyes cast down, and as he walked out of the door, and as he walked out of the chapel, Obifuna imagined Sparrow would turn round at the door at the last minute and scream his name for everyone to hear, but he had gone without so much as a backwards glance. Sparrow had saved him, and yet, despite his gratitude, he felt relief. Sparrow was leaving. He would not have the opportunity to change his mind and expose him at a later date. How cruel, how selfish, and small-minded to think, above all things, of his own safety. How monstrous to feel yet more gratitude that Sparrow was going away forever, that their relationship, such as it was finite, contained. A stench had become unbearable, and coupled with the heat, it made him dizzy, nauseous. A few feet away, a swarm of flies buzzed around a small mound of feces. They scattered when he spat, only to converge again soon afterwards. Obifuna fleetingly envied them this simple ability, the ease of gliding through, this gift of wings. The old tap on the wall made a groaning sound and dripped brown water. Obifuna leaned against the wall of the bathroom and imagined himself in flight. For days afterwards, speculations remained. Festus was an easy target, even though many people could vouch for his whereabouts in class, being particularly noisy at the time of the incident. Marco threatened to fight the next person who declared to mention his name again. He wasn't a faggot. Neither was he friends with one. But how sure are we that the person is from our class? A boy, Kayo, asked. For all we know, it could have been an SS1 boy. Sparrow, Marco said. No way. It has to be someone from our class. He decided, and his eyes momentarily rested on Obifuna. Later, Jeku said, what I just don't understand is how a fine boy like that can be a homo when he can't get any girl he wants. Maybe it's not his fault, Obifuna said. Jeku said, are you defending him? What? No, I'm just saying. Jeku laughed. I'm just joking, Biko. He paused, studied Obifuna a while. Obi, just because he was your friend for 2 minutes doesn't mean you know him. Don't support evil. He added with a teasing laugh. Who knows? He probably came after you because he wanted your ass. Obifuna managed a smile. He wondered about the contrived ring to Jeku's laugh. Something about Jeku, about everyone, told him it was only a matter of time before he was exposed. And so, without consciously meaning to, he steeled himself. It was the weight that was the hardest, to be aware of his impending fate with no ability to stop it. And yet when, a week later, he was summoned to the rector's office, Obifuna wished he had been given more time. He searched the face of the classmate who delivered the message, pleading with his eyes to be told what he already knew. As he walked down the corridor to the second floor of the rector's office, he looked over the railings at the ground beneath, wondering just how swift his death would be if he were to haul himself over. He wondered how they had found out, As Sir C.Y.'s memory finally crystallized enough to picture him, he could remember that Sir C.Y.'s torchlight had been enough to identify him, or had Sparrow finally told on him? Perhaps he had been given the condition of a suspension if he named the other culprit, and he had decided that Obifuna was not worth saving. The rector's secretary sized him up as he walked in, her face scrunched up in her signature irritation as she motioned him towards the rector's office. He rapped at the door, dreading the office before, and he was instantly intimidated by the vastness, the gleaming white walls, the compulsive sense of order. Sparrow was nowhere to be seen, but on one side of the rector was Sir Okafo, the chairman of the disciplinary committee, with Sir C.Y. on the other side. Obifuna caught quick breaths. His ears felt like a radio that had become faulty with that piercing whine. The thought came to him instantly that he should get up his knees and plead for mercy. He thought also of denying everything. It was, in the end, his word against Sparrow's. He would burst into tears at the accusation. He would tell that Sparrow had been stalking him, and because he refused him, this was Sparrow's form of revenge. His immaculate record would prove it. Sir C.Y. stood at one end of the room, his carefully neutral face giving nothing away. Sir Okafor noticed Sir Okafor motioned Obifuna forward. Sir Okafor motioned Obifuna forward. Are you Obifuna? The rector said. Obifuna considered for a wild moment, denying his name. He nodded. Can't you talk? Sir Okafor snapped impatiently. Yes, sir. I'm Obifuna. SS2A? Yes, sir. You are aware of the recent misdemeanor of a certain Mordecai Manze? Obifuna swallowed. Yes, sir. What do you think? He blinked. Sir. I want to know your thoughts on what he did, the rector said. Obifuna noticed for the first time how very small the rector's head appeared even for his small stature, giving him the look of a beanpole. He turned to Sir C.Y. and Sir Okafor, who looked on with a careful impassiveness. There was a barely restrained excitement in their manner. Were they trying to trap him in his own words, prompting him into nailing his own coffin? The rector prompted. Obifuna took a breath. The rector nodded approvingly. Obifuna took a breath. Bad, sir, very bad. The rector nodded approvingly. That's right. And it goes against everything we stand for. We don't want those kinds of students here. And we will fish all of them out. Obifuna nodded again. He felt a strange surge of strength suddenly. He was buoyed. He was buoyed by resolve. The subject was in the open now. He could afford to breathe easily. Anyway, the receptor's words snapped him back into the moon. The receptor's The receptor's words snapped him back in the room. Mordecai happened to be the sanitary prefect when he was here, and following his exclusion, the post is now vacant. The prefect committee met this morning to deliberate on a replacement, and they all settled for you. Obifuna blinked again. Sir. The rector did not acknowledge the interruption. The position of sanitary prefect is a very important one, and we were the position of sanitary prefect is a very important one, and we were quite impressed with your file. He paused. Why on earth did you not apply for the post? Obifna looked from one face to the other. From beside him, the air conditioner hummed loudly, without letting out cool air. He realized with a start that both the men were looking at him, waiting for his response. He almost burst out laughing. It had to be a wild joke. Obifuna, Sir CY called him. Are you okay? Obifuna caught himself. Yes, sir. We realized that this might be unexpected, but we are confident you will not disappoint us, the receptor said. Obifuna nodded. He wondered what Sparrow would think. Yes, sir. The receptor reclined on his chair, seeming pleased by the ease with which the task had been executed. Good. We'll make the announcement at the assembly tomorrow and present you with your tag. Okay, sir. You can go, the receptor said. Thank you. Obifuna turned to the floor and let himself. Obifuna turned to the door and let himself out. The secretary was asleep at her desk. Outside the office, he stood for a few minutes by the railings, gazing down at the vast fields of the school compound. The announcement was made at assembly the following morning. As Obifuna mounted the stairs that led to the podium, he was buoyed by the applause and whistles. He stood with his back straight and his hands behind him as Sir CY pinned the tag to his shirt, and as he looked down from the elevated podium at the sea of eyes fixed squarely on him, he wondered if there was someone there. Someone where? He wondered if there was someone there, somewhere, who knew. And that is the end of chapter 12 of part 2. Let's talk about it. Okay, to sort of recap about chapter 12 of part 2. So we essentially sort of start with a description of somebody a new character in which we're introduced to, who is called Sparrow. Sparrow is sort of this SS2 boy, and he's seen as this really cool guy. Obifuna sort of as I've seen him from time to time. He knows his little trio. They have a little trio, so he has a trio with this sort of leader, a school leader called Mauko or Makuo. He has his best friend David, and so these, Sparrow, his friends, they're seen as one of the coolest boys on campus. They have this sort of power to them, even though they don't have sort of any sort of physical sort of crazy physique, but they just have a sort of sense of authority and a sort of conceited energy to them. and some of them were quite smart, and they had their own sort of similarities in a way, which is why obviously they have sort of this trio, and so they're sort of like the coolest boys in the boarding school. But to sort of continue, I want to keep this as short as possible, but in chapter 12, we sort of explore um, Obifuna and Obifuna and Sparrow's sort of relationship. It started with them having this moment. This is a time in which prefect sort of roles are coming up, and people are sort of applying to post to become sort of prefects in the school. And Obifuna did not run, but his close friend Jeku was running, and they were together. And in the midst of Jeku preparing himself to sort of the speech he was going to give, Sparrow sort of walks up to them. Particularly, he asks Jeku if he could use his tie, and they sort of have this intense moment in which Jeku sort of like does he think he's the only one who's running? The other people are also running, and sort of basically trying to tell him like he does not want to give him his tie. But then Obifuna, obviously he has seen this guy a few times, and prior to that he has had a few admiration for Sparrow, and finally this was his chance, and so he offered to give Sparrow his tie. Jacob felt deeply betrayed by this. He looked at him in a very shocking way. Even Sparrow looked sort of puzzled in a way, sort of amused at the fact that Obifuna was offering him the tie. But anyway, he takes the tie, he thanks Obifuna, and then later comes back in the evening to return it, while Obifuna was, his dormitory with Wisdom, his roommate slash bunk mate. So when he comes, he thanks Obifuna, and then he noticed of this book on Obifuna's bed, which was by Buchi Emecheta, and it was a book that Obifuna was reading, and Sparrow was sort of captivated by that and sort of questions Obifuna that what book is this, and then and he sort of asks him what it's about, and Obifuna was kind of shy at first, and later tells him in a brief sort of one sentence summary that it's about a lady who moves to London and stuff like that. And then they sort of have this moment in which Sparrow sort of complimented him and saying that he likes the fact that he reads, and then he asks Obifuna about this other book by Buchi Emecheta, and he sort of asks if it's about the book about the slave, and then Obifuna tells him that she has several books, and there are two books in particular that talks about a slave woman, and they have this really nice moment. They're building their relationship, and they continue to build their relationship, and Wisdom sort of also questions them. Like Wisdom also questions them, like, oh, you're friends with Sparrow, and they don't really, in sort of in a very envious way and disapproving way, that he in a way that he didn't want Obifuna to surround himself with that type of person. As we know, Jeku and Wisdom have been very crucial in helping Obifuna adjust to this new boarding school experience that he has been navigating through. And so oftentimes, he listens to them, but this time, he doesn't seem to listen to them, because obviously he goes on to still continue to just having this relationship with Sparrow, and it gets to a point in which they have a very intimate moment. Not only one, but several, until they finally get caught. I'm trying not to talk too much about the intimate moments, but like usual from other chapter videos, please kindly watch those. We sort of have an idea of sort of how intimate moments normally goes with Obifuna and the boys that he have intimate moments with. But anyways, the intimate moment, as I read about, it sort of shows what they have going on. And then they continue doing this, but then boom, something happens. They get caught, and they get caught by this. I think it was SAR CY, and and the news sort of traveled around, and Obifuna ran. My boy ran, and I cannot blame him, because Child, obviously the person couldn't see him because it was dark, one, and Obifuna had his back facing the person, but the person had a torchlight, and so he could see Sparrow's face, but not Obifuna. So Obifuna took off. Obifuna ran. And that was so funny to me reading because I was like, yes, because maybe we're not going to get caught. That was not the goal. But I also felt really sad, honestly. I wish Sparrow also ran, but it's unfortunate because Sparrow was the more easy to be recognizable because, first of all, he's sort of this popular boy. Secondly, he was facing right to the in direction of the person who was coming towards them, and so, when they were having this intimate moment, he catches them, and it was just really sad that unfortunately Sparrow was caught. But I was glad the person I've been supporting, Obi for now, the person I feel the most connected to, ran away. So I was like, yes, that's what I would have done. The circumstances, you have to think about that. You don't want to. First of all, the reason why you're brought to this school is because your father wanted you sort of, I guess, take away this homosexual part of you because he catches you with this other boy, and so now you're in boarding school to not do things like this. So imagine being caught and then the news getting to your parents, particularly your father, and just imagine how, I would deeply be fearful and I would have ran too. So I'm glad he ran. But anyways, Sparrow gets caught, the news travels around, and then he faces consequences. He's humiliated, he's embarrassed, and the whole campus, everybody knows. And it was just really sad reading about all that. And then he had to sort of speak in front of the crowd. They were all sort of saying things, some of them were sort of bullying him in a way. At some point, he almost tripped when the seniors were like playing with his trousers. Just all these things. It was just really sad reading that. I really felt bad for Sparrow. And then, at some point, he had to leave. His consequence was that he had to leave the school. And Obifuna, in a way, felt relieved by it. And just thinking about that shows just his deep fear and uncertainty. He was scared. He didn't want his name to be out. He knew what that would do to his reputation in the school and what that would also do when, his parents possibly found about this huge thing that's not supposed to be done in their school campus being committed by their son, who was literally in boarding school for how many months, or probably a year now. So I don't even think it's a year yet, but is it a year? Probably a year now. But yeah, all these things, I'm pretty sure he was thinking about that in that moment, but also he felt deep down a sort of sadness to the fact that this person whom he has sort of formed this intimate connection with, and it happened to start being something that, they were getting in love, and it was really sad seeing that they were caught, and just the fact that what pissed me off is the idea that he was slowly actually finding somebody in which he just was taking things slow, like even when he took the initiative to not do something that he felt as though he would regret at some point. I felt that was incredible. I'm glad he didn't go straight to doing crazy things, and this sort of just started with just little intimate things, and not really doing any too sexually or explicit things. And so I admired his courage, but also I felt sad the fact that now he sort of lost this person who he was sort of forming this different sort of relationship with, not just intimate or sexual stuff, but now just actual sort of intimate, like kissing and stuff like that. And so it was really sad reading that. But anyways, Obi Funa ends up feel this sense of relief, but he felt deep down that it was evil with the fact that he felt that way, as the idea of this person whom he obviously loved or still loves and cherishes, because they've been having these relationship and they have sort of similar themes together, and they've been having these different conversations about how Sparrow would tell him about his favorite themes and how he loved music and how he would tell him my favorite movie. They were having just different things that he just felt was different in a way, and now sort of taken away from him. And then we have this situation in which he gets up being picked as the new sanitary prefect, which was actually the role that Sparrow previously had before he was kicked out from the school. And I found that really funny. It actually wasn't funny, but it was actually no, I know, but yeah, that's what I found funny. I found the idea of Obifuna bursting out into laugh because he thought it was a sort of a wild joke or something. That the fact that these Sir CY and Sir Okafor told him that he would now be the new person and sort of questioned him why he didn't run for the post. And I was just like, oh. But then part of me is like, are they trying to do something with this? Are they trying to set him up? So that's what I'm really looking forward to reading the next chapter. But if not, I hope they don't set him up or anything. I really hope that he did get this role. Um, but anyways, after he gets the role, he sort of had to make a speech at the assembly, and people were sort of like cheering at him. But deep down, when he was looking at the crowd, he just had this feeling, that sort of sense of fear that, yeah, there was someone there, somewhere in that crowd that knew what happened between him and, you know, Sparrow, despite the fact that Sparrow was kind enough to not name Obifuna at all. And that's also something I found really beautiful, and that sort of emphasizes on why I think it really was like love or something, because you're put in this position and yet you still hold on to this person's name and not tell the public. I love Sparrow for that. I'm really sorry that happened to him. No, seriously. But yeah, that's sort of my recap about chapter 12 of part 2. Thank you so much for watching this video, and thank you for staying all the way to the end. If you enjoy this video, please kindly subscribe, like, and comment. Thank you. Bye. Okay.